Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first in our reporting in Microsoft Dynamics webinars. Just to say, I will reiterate this at the end, there is a second one next week on Thursday at the same time, which is to do with third-party applications that are available for Microsoft Dynamics. So the presentation today will be done by myself, Philip Stride, Director at Infodata Solutions, and Neil Wright, who should be doing the technical presentation. For those of you who know me, you'll know that's by far and away the best way to do it. Okay, so for everybody else, not so long ago PwC did a survey mostly around AX clients, but 75% of clients that installed Dynamics had a reporting issue, some of it due to poor data migration, and they felt not enough of the partners had enough reporting focus early on in the project. Now, obviously, if you're putting in a new business application, then the ability to get the data out and turn it into information is absolutely key. Now, the way Microsoft have gone is it's changing its strategy. It realised it had a gap. It's been buying products like FRX and ProClarity, and it's decided to enhance BI tools in a number of other of its products as well. They wanted a common thread. They've decided SQL was that thread, and actually they've hung a lot of the tools off of that. We can see those common threads as new releases of the Dynamics suite come through, whether that's NAV, CRM, GP, SL or AX, and we had people book onto this webinar who had a copy of every one of those, so all five. We don't see many of the SL, the old Solomon product over here so much, so welcome to you all. But we've seen that in a number of the other products. They started to put a common thread running through, whether it's through the .NET development application that's now coming through a common CRM. For those of you with AX, I'm well aware of the fact that AX has its own CRM. Microsoft has indicated that at some point they will replace the inbred AX CRM with the Microsoft Dynamics CRM, SharePoint, and now we're seeing SSRS coming through. There'll be people on there on the call who've used FRX, X++, JET, perhaps fetch-based XML, which is the report wizard in CRM. All of those things are going to start to change, and they are going to try and use more of a generic tool set as they go along. For those of you who think, well, that's okay, because I've been using SSRS for a long time with my applications, we could see that coming. People have used in the past, have used stored procedures in SQL. That has caused a problem when it's gone to upgrading. Microsoft don't see stored procedures now as the way to develop your BI and reporting, and that has created, again, quite a large piece of work to upgrade from that. So, moving on, the views that people will be seeing very much in the new suite of Dynamics products will be very much around role centers. And the new modern role centers are coming through, and the way that Microsoft see a vision of the future is to have information presented to users in front of them, rather than having reports flying around in either through printed out reports or in the form of emails with reports attached. This is the way that they see the future, trying to get as many people in an organisation on and presenting that information to them easily and quickly, and that sounds excellent. In fact, actually just taking a view of the future, here's a view of Microsoft Dynamics, one of the ERP products, actually looking at a Windows 8 environment and the way they see it perhaps going in the future. So, whatever your situation as a whole, when we talk about reporting and BI, actually we're talking about a vast range of different things. So at one end in the BI, the business intelligence area, we're looking at KPIs and scorecards and exception alerting and sending messages through. And at the other end, maybe it's just queries, ad hoc analysis, or just a very simple report, and everything in between. And Microsoft has a vast amount of tools. Now, the upper end tools can do all the simple stuff as well, but that can be a bit technical to get involved. But within the Dynamics suite, as you move forward and with the new versions, you will start to see things like queues coming out within the Role Center. The Role Center is where Microsoft is presenting each user or group of users a view of the business, and you can have queues that give you instant information on what's happening. Searches, list pages, auto reports, Excel add-ins, all those simple things there. As we get a little bit more complex, perhaps we're starting to look at SQL Server Report Builder. Maybe we're looking at Dynamics Chart Controls using SQL Server reporting services. And then right up at the top end, we can start to see one of the new products, Power View, coming through, or SharePoint Server utilizing those skills in order to get the information onto our role centers. We're using web parts or SharePoint parts. So lots of things going on with Performance Point and perhaps using Power Pivot as well. So a whole range of things. Now, what is right for you, each individual company? The trouble is there are those companies who want all of those things that we have in front of us now, want everything from the ability to do that. Do we have to use a whole smash of different tools, or can we use one? So let's have a look at some of those. Power Pivot. Now, this is an add-in to Excel. We'll be showing you a little bit of this. Neil will be showing you a demo of this in a minute. And basically, for those of you who've used Excel for a long time, the pivot table is really extending the capabilities of that pivot table data for summaries, cross-table features, the ability to expand data capacity, getting advanced calculations, importing data from multiple sources, and publish the workbooks back through SharePoint so that other people can view them. So one of the key things it does is, so I'm informed, I have to say, because I've never had a spreadsheet that's managed to do this, but there is a limit on the number of rows. When we start to get into Power Pivot, that limit goes. So we have the ability to have millions and millions if you've got large amounts of data. Now, the one thing I would say here is, before everybody thinks, oh, that's brilliant, I'll download my whole database into Excel with Power Pivot, there is actually a limit on the workbook of 2 gigabytes on disk and 4 gigabytes in memory. So again, personally, never had an Excel that large, but that is a limitation before we get all too carried away there. And really, in the past, where Microsoft relied heavily on SQL Server analysis services as its engine for the BI suite, we've actually got a tool here that can do that. One thing it does do is it does create its own database in Excel, but that can be linked to the scheduled updates. So you can, in fact, schedule those updates. If you wanted a weekly updated data that you could then do a report based on, then you can set that up through SharePoint to regularly update that. SharePoint, for those of you who've gone down the route or seen 2013, that's a much newer Windows 8 kind of look and feel about it with new Office. Quite a nice little tool there, used for displaying tools like the Performance Point, which sits in SharePoint 2013 and Power View, etc. And it's used for applying, as I've already mentioned, the role centers to, the web parts to role centers. Moving on, Power View. This was announced last year and basically brought out to try and counter the plethora of third-party tools that were able to do so. So much more on the BI front. You'll see elements of Pro Clarity, PowerPoint, etc. in SQL Server 2012 with Power View. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time, Neil is going to demo here the new capabilities of Power View, what it can do around the BI with some, it can do some ad hoc visualization experience. There's a wonderful phrase there from Microsoft. And it enables quick and easy views of the data, allows you to share collaboration of business information, again, linking in through SharePoint. You can use Power View to bring in information from any source. So I say any source, I should say virtually any source. So whether it's an Excel, whether it's Power Pivot, whether it's other SQL databases, then you have that right. SSRS, and one of the tools we'll be looking at here will be the Report Builder, basically a simple authoring tool that features, it's a very much Microsoft Office-like environment, tools like the data bar and indicator, data visualizations, the ability to save and report on items such as report parts. There's a wizard for creating maps, aggregates of aggregates when we start to get more complicated in the way we are doing our numbers, and enhanced supports for expressions. The last two products we won't be demonstrating today. Happy to talk to anybody if they want to see these a little bit more. A Management Reporter and Performance Point. These are slightly older products, and we'll be looking at these with a couple of PowerPoints at the end rather than demonstrations. Management Reporter is an ERP-based product, so for those of you who have CRM, you won't see this. But this is the real-time financial reporting application designed to empower the staff, allowing them to fairly quickly and easily generate things like P&L, balance sheets, cash flow reports, etc. So it's a very simple financial reporting tool. Does have a centralized report library that allows you to report, to distribute the reports from it, and it includes data integration, pulling out of the databases of all four of the basic ERP products. The latest versions of Management Reporter was released in 2012. It will pick up the latest versions of SL, of NAV, of GP. For AX, it will do 2012. It can go back to AX 2009, providing you have Roll-Up 8 linked. And lastly there, Performance Point, which brings together a lot of Microsoft various BI operations offerings in one package. Business Scorecard Manager, Excel. There's newly developed apps for planning and forecasting and viewing things. Some of the product Clarity acquisition that you'll see in PowerView, if you know ProClarity, some of you will see here. In simple terms, it's actually a great monitoring tool. So you can use dashboards, include more sophisticated KPIs and scorecards, and create new reports, KPI details report, etc. And even go down to open a decomposition tree that allows you to drill down, do top 10 filters, things like that. So Performance Point Services is now coming out with SharePoint Server 2013. So allows you to get all that with your SharePoint. So basically, they're the tools we're going to talk about today. So, and just to put that in another graphic is to look at perhaps the way that we take from the data sources up through the developer tools into the way that we might view things to the user access. So some of these tools like Excel and therefore the Power Pivot you will see coming through and can provide both the almost all of those requirements, whereas others will be using things like SharePoint and therefore the role centers to display those tools. If anybody does want a copy of these tools, because I'm not going to add these slides, by the way, please send us a note at the end and we'll be happy to provide them. So we're not spending a lot of time doing it now because I think people will want to see some of these tools in action. So at this point in time, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Neil Wright. Neil has been in the BI industry for a lot of time, certainly the last 10 years working with the Microsoft stack, working with the different tools. At this point I'm going to hand over to Neil and ask Neil to take over with the live demonstration.
All right. Good afternoon everybody. I'm just sharing my screen at the moment. Can everybody see that display right now? It's effectively excellent.
Coming through now, Neil, thank you.
Okay, good. All right, in terms of the products that Philip has been talking about, I'm going to start off with Excel and Power Pivot and just give you a very quick display of this solution and a couple of others during the next 35 minutes. So Excel is probably the most common BI reporting tool you could ever hope to meet, and it connects to a variety of data sources. It now contains this embedded database called Power Pivot, which is effectively a columnar database, which is so-called in memory. It loads all of the data into memory, so the speed of response is so much quicker. If I look firstly at Power Pivot and how it displays itself, because there's not terribly much to see it being a database and so on. We can see the data model here. I've got a very, very simple data model. And in this particular case, I'm actually drawing data from the Dynamics AX 2009 standard cubes, primarily because there's some worthwhile or some useful demo data in those cubes. And you'll see as I go through the various demonstrations, I tend to use that data because it is so easily available. If I switch to a data view, I can now see how that data exists in a sort of tabular structure. And these two tabs over here relate to the data that is coming from the cubes. And this data here relates to data coming from the actual Excel spreadsheet that I'm going to use to present some data in. I should just point out that I've mentioned cubes, I mentioned the Excel spreadsheet itself. You can get data from any number of sources, relational databases, the new tabular database that exists in SQL Server, you can draw it from text files and so on and so on and so on. All right, if I move to the spreadsheet that is presenting this data, we'll see there's a couple of pivot tables and there's a pivot chart here and something very useful that's rather not unused at the moment, which is a slicer. And so I can set up these slicers. I've only got one in here, but you can have a number of slicers. And I can click, for example, on the year 2008 and see the data changing throughout my various pivot tables and pivot charts. I can expand on my information in a pivot chart. And I can, for example, let's double-click on this particular amount here, and it will go down and get the underlying transactions for me. So Excel itself is a very, very useful tool for presenting our data. One of the things I didn't mention is that Power Pivot can actually draw data from a SQL Server Reporting Services report or an SSRS report. And one of the tools that we can use to create SSRS reports is something called Report Builder, another Microsoft tool. And I'm going to show you how that particular tool works now. So I'm going to click on my SharePoint environment and go into my Documents area. I'm working with SharePoint 2013 at the moment. Again, as I mentioned, convenient data in Dynamics AX Cubes, so I'm going to go into that environment now. And in this particular instance, to open up a report builder or begin building a report builder report, I click on Files, New Document, and Report Builder Report. It's going to now open up my environment for me, the actual software itself. And I can then begin to create this report using a wizard where a data set is first created. In other words, I select the fields and parameters that I require for my report from the data source. And then from that point in time, find my report and save it to the SharePoint environment. And we'll have a report that's available for everybody to use. Taking a bit of time. I should just mention I've only got 8 gigabytes of memory on here, so SharePoint is very, very hungry. Could I just confirm that you can hear me?
Well, I can hear you, Neil, and I'm about 50 miles away.
Okay, good. was very silent, so I just wanted to make sure that I could be heard. Okay, so Report Builder 3 is opening up very, very slowly, unfortunately. While it is actually opening, I'll mention to you that we can present our data or export our data to a variety of destinations once we've got this report going. And I'll show you that in a moment. So I've got a couple of wizards here that I could use, including a map wizard, which has dynamic maps and so on. But I'm going to click on a table or matrix wizard. I need to create my data set first. And so I'm going to click on Next. I have a variety of data sources here, so I'm going to use the first one. And as I've mentioned, this is cubes, but it could be an AX database, a CRM database, a NAV database, a generic SQL Server database that we're using. I'm going to select a particular cube to use. There's 10 of them here. And I'm going to use the sales cube. I should just point out while I'm here for any AX listeners or audience that reporting from a variety of separate cubes like this can be very, very difficult. And this is where a tool like Power Pivot enables you to bring the data from two disparate cubes together. For example, the purchases cube and the sales cube. You might want to see your purchase information and your corresponding sales information. And this is where, and Power Pivot is where you might be able to do that, where normally you can't report on cubes when they're separate. So I'll click on OK. And that's going to display for me my measures and my dimensions. And I'm going to go into my customer invoice transaction lines, and I'm going to select amount, my sales amount in other words. I'm going to select my cost of goods sold. And what I haven't done is contextualize this information. So I'm going to go in and use my item dimension to select my item groups and my item names. So I'll just drag down here till I get to item. My apologies, wrong one. Item, and then I'm going to look for my item group, drag in the item group level, and then my item name, drop it in between there. All right, I have a good starting point for my data, but I don't have gross margin in my measures up here, so I'd like to create a calculated member. So in my calculated member area, right-click to create a new one. I'm going to type in gross margin and select the measures that I require. So amount, and a minus sign, and cost of goods sold, and say OK to that. Very important that once I've done that, I actually bring the field or the measure into my data. Now, in order to make this an interactive report, I need to include some parameters up here. And the first one I'm going to select is my item type. If I need to know what's in the item type, I can expand on my information here, and I can see that it's bills of material that I could sell, or items I could sell, or services I could sell. I'm going to bring the entire attribute in, drop it in there. And then, of course, we can't do very much without a time parameter. And I don't have many options here, just a single hierarchy. And I'm going to bring that in and drop that in. Now, in order to make this interactive, I need to effectively say you're not just a filter, you're a parameter as well that users are able to select from. Good. So there's my data set done, or my query done. I'm going to click on Next now. And now I can start structuring my report. So I'm going to group by my item group level. And the remaining fields I'm going to shift and select, drag them into my values area, and click on Next. I can select subtotals and grand totals, or remove that selection. I'm in this particular case going to remove my expand or collapse groups so that I show the entire report in a single viewing. Click on Next. I've now got a couple of options in terms of display, but I'll just remain with Ocean. And I now have my report in place. I'm going to widen the report and widen a couple of the columns that I don't have any wraparound. And then in terms of my values, I know that in the database there's a variety of decimal places displayed. I've highlighted all my value fields, and I'll now go down to my format area and type in hash, comma, hash, just to exclude decimals. Lastly, I'll just put in a quick heading, and I'm now ready to have a look at this report and see how it displays to me. So I click on Run, and the first thing it's going to do, because I've requested to have parameters that enable interactive selections, I first have to select from my parameter list. So, for example, I'll select bills and items. I could select all, in which case it would present all my data to me. And once that's selected by the report, I now am able to select from my dates. At the moment, because the cube is very limited in terms of its presentation of data, time data, I need to scroll down. With a bit of development, you would be able to include just months, for example, but that requires a bit of development in the report. Click on View Report, and that's going to present the report as I and other users would see it. Now, that's what we can see now. I could change my filters if I so wish. So, for example, I'll change that to Bill of Materials and View again. And that will change my data. So users are able to use this report. And this report, once I've saved it, would be available in SharePoint. I'm also able, as I mentioned a little earlier, able to export my data into a variety of different formats, PDF, Excel, etc., etc. Right. I'm going to now move from this particular report. In fact, before I forget about this, I'm not going to bother saving this particular report, but if I go back into my SharePoint environment and look at a report builder report, which is already saved there, I should just point out that if I click on my ellipsis button and then click on the ellipsis button within the contextual menu, to go back to my report to edit it, I can manage subscriptions. Now, subscriptions is a way in which you can schedule a basis. We can include data alerts where, based on certain parameters or KPIs, information will be sent out to indicate that a benchmark has been breached in some fashion. Right, and so that's how we can manage that particular report once it's being created within the wizard. Good. That is report build done. I suppose I should just mention that if for more complex reports and more sophisticated reports, you're also able to use SQL Server reporting services within the Visual Studio environment, and there are certain cases where you do need to do that rather than using a report builder. At this point in time, I'm going to go and show you how to create a PowerView dashboard and see how we can use it from there. So in this particular case, I just need to click on a data source, which is going to be my H2009 standard cubes yet again. And this is going to open up the PowerView application. And once PowerView is open, I will have a canvas here in which on the right-hand side I'll have my fields or in terms of the cube, my measures and my dimensions, and I can now drag my information in here. So I'm going to start again with amount, drag my amount in, I'll just drop it anywhere here, and it's going to create an object for me, which I will then add to. Now in this particular instance, I'm firstly going to use my customer groups hierarchy within my customer dimension. So I'll just collapse my measures for a moment and go down to my customer dimension. And in there, I will look for my customer groups hierarchy, which is this one here. And I'm going to drag in my customer group above my field amount or above that value. Now I'm going to drag in my customers. And that's going to present to me, as you can see from the highlighted block up there, a table, a pretty flat table of data. I prefer to see it as a matrix, and you can see that change when you look at the customer group column as soon as it refreshes. Right, I'll format that value later. I'm going to click away from this object because it's active at the moment, and anything I do will now affect that particular object. I'm going to have multiple objects in here in order that I can slice and dice some of my information, and I can then see a variety of perspectives of my data. In other words, contextualizing amount by customer and by item group, and in a moment by a time trend. So again, need my amount to start with. So I'll drag that, I can drag it in here as opposed to dropping it over here. As you can see, it creates an object to the right of the existing one. And I'm going to go down to my item dimension. It's all in alphabetical order, so I'm able to scroll through quite quickly. And I'm going to select my item group from here. Drop in. I'll make my object a little bigger. And I'm going to change the display of my object. I like a pie chart in this particular case. I'll select from a variety of different objects that I can use. There's my pie chart there. And it will present the pie chart to me. Good. The last object I'm going to include in my canvas is a bar chart to indicate the trend over time. And so I'm going to, again, go for my item. Firstly, I need to deactivate the other objects. Go for amount. Let's put that over here. And then go for my time dimension. Expand on that. Expand on my hierarchy and select month. Drop that in there. And I'll quickly rearrange everything here. And change it to a column or a bar chart so that we can see the trend of data over time. Now, as you can see, I'll go from July 2007 through to May 2009, which is the extent of our data in the system. I'm going to now drag year into my filters area, and that will enable me to filter over all three objects here. So, for example, I can select 2009, and we'll see how that will change the information. Okay, alternatively, let's go to 2008, which is a full 12 months of data. There we go. Now, you'll notice there's a couple of options up here. One of the things I can do is click on the advanced filter mode, and I can now change this into a variety of different things. So I can select on or after, before, etc., etc. I'm just going to leave this as it's displayed at the moment, but I'm going to tick this tiny little pin over here because as long as I do that, any subsequent pages that I create will be able to be filtered by this filter as well. Right, I'm now going to create a second page or a second view as it's described over here. So let's go up to my home and click on New View and select first option there. Now, one of the things this Power View does is links through, providing you're online, of course, links through to Bing Maps. And so I'm going to create a map so that I can see across the environment where our organization is generating revenue and how well our various regions are doing. So in terms of my sales analysis, looking back at amount again, I'm going to now present that as a map, which is conveniently placed up here. So I click on Map and expand it so that it displays across my entire canvas. Good. Now I'm going to go to my customer dimension, which includes country and region. And I'm going to drag that in here to my location. And you'll immediately see now it starts to home in on the particular countries. Now, there's no particular coding that I've done here. Just within the AX data, as you have with most business systems, you've got the country codes, and that is what it's recognizing within my data. I'm also going to drag in city so that I can drill down on city. And in order to filter both pages now on country and region as well, so I can see the impact in both pages of selecting a particular country, I'm going to bring my filter in again, my country and region filter, and I'll remember to pin it. Okay. Now, let's say I want to look at Mexico. Mexico is my country at the moment that I want to look at because in terms of the bubbles here, Mexico has got the sort of smallest value or close to the smallest value. And we can see that 54802 is the value that is being displayed. Let's focus in on it firstly. So I'm going to click on Mexico, and you'll see it will exclude the data from the other regions. And I'm going to double click on Mexico, and we can now see what cities within Mexico we've been selling into. And of course, if your postal codes are nicely tied in and Bing Maps recognizes those postal codes, we can also see that we can drill down to that information as well. Now, I can hover over Mexico City, and I can see that that represents 13,600, and this particular city here that I can't pronounce, unfortunately, has a value of 41,000. If I go back, and before I go back to my first page, I'm just going to change the view so that you can see how it would look once it's saved to the SharePoint environment. So I'm going to click on reading mode. Okay, and I'm going to click down the right-hand corner here to go back to my first screen, and you can now see, not terribly well formatted, but 54,800 is what is displayed here. I can further drill down on my information. So, for example, I might select to click on Home Theatre Systems because that's the majority of my sales. Let's see where these items have been sold. So we can see that, as we expected, looking at the shaded portion and the dark portion, that the majority of home theatres are sold, generally speaking, across the board, across time. And in this particular case, it relates to sales to the Value Hotel. So the Value Hotel has been quite busy in terms of buying speaker systems for Mexico, that is. All right. And of course, if I want to edit my report, I can go back to that environment, or I can display it in full screen mode. Now, one of the other things I can do is I can click on File here, and I can export this to PowerPoint. I'll do that now on the assumption that I have enough time. Ian, you'll shout to me if I don't have enough time, will you?
We are getting close there, Neil.
Okay, good. All right. I'll just save it to an existing file. Okay, and in fact, if I go to my desktop, I should find something here in any event. So one of the important things about the PowerPoint environment is that it is both interactive, or can be interactive, and it's also able to update the data. So I won't do it right now, but if I was to go into the slideshow by pressing on F5 or clicking on slideshow and starting it, it would firstly ask me to log in to ensure that I'm the right person to be refreshing this particular PowerPoint presentation, and then would refresh the data thereafter. And that is pretty much how PowerView works at this particular point in time. It is a very new product, and so there's a lot of things you can't do yet, but it has been enhanced and improved all the time. Right, I'm just going to move quickly across to my slides, because I just wanted to give you a very, very brief taste in terms of screenshots of what Performance Point might actually present to you. Firstly, that is. And so in Performance Point, its primary strength is its ability to monitor the organization. And so somebody can go into their Performance Point environment, into their particular dashboard, at whatever level they are in the organization, and check out their particular KPIs. And for example, here we have a balanced scorecard, which enables the organization to evaluate itself not just in terms of the financial perspective, but in terms of how they're doing against the customer, how their internal operations are working, and how they're developing their own teams and staff to handle their customers and their internal operations. Visio services, or Visio, is employed within the Performance Point environment to enable you to display strategy maps, for example, and to highlight in traffic light colors where you're doing well and where you're not doing so well. There's a second screenshot of a dashboard in Performance Point. And then lastly, I'll just touch on Management Reporter, which is for the ERP system specifically, and we can see on the right-hand side here an income statement, for example. And in this particular case, an income statement that is presenting data from two organizations. So there's consolidation possibilities. Even if you're not consolidating, but just wish to aggregate data, you're able to aggregate your data in using this particular tool. But it's very, very financial statement orientated. And one of its major benefits is being able to publish very, very presentable financial statements out to the organization and publicly, if you so wish. And lastly, it handles so-called XBRL, which is the ability to send your information to organizations such as Companies House. At that point, I'm going to pass back to Philip. So I'm going to stop sharing my environment and hand you over to Philip again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Just to wrap up our brief demonstration then, we've seen some of the tools here. We've looked at some Performance Points and Power Pivots and Power View, lots of different tools which hopefully you'll be able to use and say, yes, I could do with that, I could do with that. Let's just have a look at some of the pros of this lot. Well, firstly, they're Microsoft tools. They all work together. Now, before everybody starts sniggering, saying you've got Microsoft and all working together, then, especially as I know we've had a couple of issues here on the sound through Link, but the fact is that they probably work together better than if we start to get some of the third-party tools involved. Certainly, the third-party tools aren't going to be as updated as quickly as they possibly can. As Neil has pointed out, the Power View there is constantly being updated. And part of Microsoft's requirements are when it releases products that it does work with others. That's not to say there's going to be no problems, but that is one of their requirements. There's lots of tools. We've only scratched the surface. You know, we haven't spent a lot of time looking at some of the other SSRS tools, video, integration services, or Visual Studio in any way. So lots of things there. And they're constantly developing, moving forward. They've realized, I think, from a few years ago that BI, there was a gap and wasn't meeting the needs of their customers who were perhaps going out and looking at third-party products. So therefore, you're left with the only alternative being a third-party product. And we will be looking at some of the third-party products next week, Thursday, 12:30. We will be having a second webinar looking at some of the best third-party products to use. But right now, you know, if you have a strategy, and a number of our clients, one we're working with right now, has a strategy that says everything is Microsoft. Everything must be Microsoft, no third-party products. Then Microsoft now starts to bring together the tools to enable you to work. On the counter to that, you know, you could say, well, there's lots of tools, and you've seen things that perhaps you think, well, hold on, Neil showed that earlier, and that tool did exactly the same thing. And does Microsoft have a cohesive strategy over BI? And some people would say that perhaps that is a little questionable. So which one is right for you? And you probably end up with the fact that, well, you probably need to start to use 2 or 3 of these tools, depending on your requirements for BI and reporting. SSRS is probably the only one-for-all tool. That's the one that can do everything for you. It is very technical, though. And the problem with that is that I have found that most of our clients are saying is, well, we don't want to go back to the 80s when we used to have an IT department to do everything, and, you know, they had a 6-month-long list of reports that they had to produce. You know, we want to give this power to the users. Some of those tools that Neil has shown you, certainly users can pick up. But for the one tool that does everything, the SQL Server reporting services, that's probably just getting a bit too technical. And if you do start going down the route of using a number of these tools, then obviously you're starting to get to a variety of development and technical skills that are going to be required by people in your organization. And lastly, because I tend to find a lot of people who are putting in new ERP systems, upgrading their dynamics, one of the issues they have is that actually people take information out, take data out of the SQL database, put it into Excel, and then we're into multi-versions of the truth. Yes, we can add this column to that column, and we can get a different version, and we can present a different number. So you have to be very careful about how much access you allow. Some great tools in Power Pivot and Excel, but again, and once you can sync up the database to it, you are allowing people to effectively do things that won't affect the data in SQL, but you are allowing them to effectively present data in a different way. Okay, just one thing to remember, you know, I suppose we were all told computers are going to solve everything for us. They can be great for our processes, but if you can't get the information out, then you haven't got anything. A flood of data is no good, so let's try and get that wisdom out. I'd like to thank you all for attending. Apologies for being a few minutes over, and certainly apologies if you had any difficulties with the sound or the viewing of the slides. There will be a recording of this, and we will make that available to everybody, put it up on the website for download. So thank you very much. As I've said, there is a second on our series on reporting in Dynamics on looking at some of the third-party products available, and that will be next Thursday at 12:30. Please let us know if you want access to that. It is on our website where you can join. You have our details there. Happy to take any questions now. I do appreciate we have gone over by a couple of minutes, so if anybody wants to write down their questions, feel free. That we will deal with those, or if you want to deal with us on a one-to-one basis, please feel free to call or email those questions to us. So, does anybody have a question? Looks like yes, Francisco does. Excellent, Francisco. Just wait for Francisco's. I don't know whether we want to take people off mute here. Can you integrate Power View reports to performance point scorecards? Ooh, interesting one. Neil, would you like to answer that?
It is a good question. I very much doubt it at this particular point in time. Certainly not into scorecards. But it's worthwhile checking up on what the plans are for that. Power View is very standalone. I say standalone as long as it's embedded in SharePoint. But I don't know that it actually is visible in the performance point scorecards at the moment. But worthwhile checking on, absolutely.
So, Francisco, it's obviously not something we've come across before. We will investigate that for you and email you an answer and make that answer available to everybody else as well. And a quick note from Mike there, is Power View part of Excel? And if so, which version?
Okay. There's two ways in which you can see Power View or work with Power View. One is through Excel. There's a limitation in terms of that. You can only look at Power Pivot and tabular database. Tabular is this new method of displaying data. It's really the big brother of Power Pivot. And you can only see that data from those sources in the and work with it in the Excel environment. And that is Excel 2013. I'm just trying to recall if it actually does work in 2010. I think it is an add-on into 2010 as well.
I think it's an add-on. I think they're making it part of 2013, is my understanding. The enhanced Power View and Power Pivot they are going to put into Office for 2013.
It absolutely is. And in fact, I should have shown you there's a button on Excel 2013 where you can click on Power View to begin to create a Power View report. And as long as you've got a Power Pivot database as a source or a tabular database as a source, you can use your Excel in a standalone. Otherwise, you're using Power Pivot in the SharePoint environment, which is what I was doing, and I was then able to also use cubes as a data source. But however, you need to have SQL Server 2012 with a particular cumulative update in order to, 2012 R2 with a particular cumulative update in order to use cubes as a data source. Otherwise, it is purely Pivot, Power Pivot and tabular databases.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. There's no more questions coming through, so I hope, Mike, we've answered your question there. Thank you very much, one and all. We'll close off the session, but if there is anything else that anybody wishes to ask us, as I say, our details are up on the screen. Please feel free to call us. Thank you very much indeed.